No one saw it coming, not the staff, not the officials, not even the woman who had spent her life studying animal behavior. A predator and a stray, worlds apart in instinct and biology, yet there they were, the young leopard with shadows in her eyes, and the silent dog who refused to leave her side. They tried everything to pull them apart, rules, cages, sedatives, but what happened next didn't just challenge science, it shattered it. Because in that still, breathless moment at the gate, with cameras rolling and the world watching, a single act of loyalty proved something no law had ever written: real bonds don't follow protocol, and love, in its rawest form, doesn't ask for permission. Before we start, if you've ever believed that true connection goes beyond species, beyond rules, this story is for you. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because what you're about to witness isn't just a story, it's a moment that changes everything. Speech balloon and tell us in the comments. Do you think animals feel love the same way we do? We read every word. The desert stretched out in dull ochre bands as the afternoon heat fell like a curtain over Delmore Valley. Dust clung to every surface: wire fences, rusted hinges, old signage so sun-bleached you could barely read. Refuge intake, authorized only. The wind didn't blow here, it scraped. And behind the outer enclosure of Pen 9, two creatures lay together in an image so strange, so wholly against nature, that even the most seasoned wildlife staff no longer knew what to call it. The leopard was young, no more than 3 years, but already dulled by captivity. Her coat was once brilliant, golden with rosettes sharp as ink, but now it had the matted look of something that no longer cared. Her name was Mara. She came in 7 months earlier, shot with tranquilizers after being found pacing a mango grove too close to the city. She had barely survived the darting. No one knew what happened to her family. But she had stopped eating after intake. For weeks, they thought she wouldn't last. Then came the dog. No one knew where he came from. A mutt cream-colored with a black snout and intelligent, hawkish eyes. He appeared one morning outside her pen, staring in. Just staring. Quiet. Motionless. At first, the staff ignored him. This valley was full of throwaway dogs, abandoned when tourists left or ranchers cleared land. But he didn't move. Even when shooed. Even when pelted with rocks. By the 3rd day, he had dug a shallow trench beside the chain-link fence of Mara's enclosure. And there he lay. Day and night. Whether it rained or burned with heat. He didn't bark. Didn't whine. He just stayed. The first time Mara approached the fence, Evelyn wasn't there to see it, but the grainy footage from the intake camera told her everything. The leopard moved slowly, tail flicking low, as if not entirely in control of her own decision. The dog didn't move. His ears twitched, eyes wide but unflinching. When Mara pressed her nose to the wire, the moment lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then she turned away. But that night she ate. For the first time in over a week. And every night after, only when the dog was present. Evelyn Rowe arrived at the refuge 11 days after the first incident. She hadn't planned to stay long. She was just supposed to review the declining behavior reports of a dozen wild cats and file recommendations. But she hadn't stepped 10 feet inside the gate before a young intern named Zola pulled her aside, phone in hand. "You need to see this." It was a silent video, shaky, clearly recorded through the mesh of enclosure 9. Mara, still and regal in the dirt, and beside her, curled up with his muzzle buried in her flank, was the same dog. His back rising and falling against her ribs. Her paw half draped over his spine. Evelyn watched the entire clip without speaking. Then she asked only one question. "Where is he now?" They called him nothing. Just the stray. Some of the volunteers had been calling him Ghost, because of the way he moved, always quiet, never barking. But the staff hadn't named him. Names implied ownership. Attachment. Evelyn didn't care for either of those things. But she understood instinct. She'd studied cheetahs in Namibia, lions in Botswana. She'd spent days tracking wolves in silence across Finland's snowy woods. But this was different. No survival strategy explained why a leopard would sleep only when a dog pressed against her, or why a dog would refuse food unless it was passed through the leopard's gate. It went against biology, against history. And yet, it was happening. That evening, Evelyn sat outside the pen for nearly 2 hours, taking notes. She watched Mara lift her head when the dog got up to drink. Watched how she waited, eyes soft, until he returned. She watched him press his nose gently to her cheek before laying down again, as if checking she was still breathing. And the way she exhaled, only then, was not the kind of breath that came from instinct. It came from trust. 3 days later, the center tried to remove the dog. They said it was for health and safety. "We're not licensed for this kind of interaction," Martin, the center director, insisted. "If someone finds out we're allowing this kind of cohabitation, if this turns bad, we'll lose our permits." They planned it quietly. No sedation, just the catch-and-leash method. The handlers timed it during feeding, when Mara would be distracted. They were wrong. The moment they stepped through the gate, the dog stiffened. But it was Mara who moved first, rising like slow thunder, stepping between the dog and the men. Her tail didn't lash. She didn't bare teeth. But she placed herself there, deliberate and immovable. Her body language was not defensive, it was protective. One wrong step, and someone would bleed. The men backed out. The next attempt came 2 nights later. They used food, fresh meat and cooked scraps, to lure the dog out. The moment he stepped over the threshold, the wire gate dropped behind him. Mara made a sound no one at the shelter had ever heard. Not a roar. Not even a growl. A low, guttural cry, strangled in her throat. A sound of loss. For the next 36 hours, Mara didn't move from that gate. She didn't touch food. Didn't drink. She batted the water bowl away when it was pushed through the flap. Her fur stood on end when anyone approached. She watched the fence. Unblinking. Evelyn didn't sleep. She sat with the surveillance footage, rewinding over and over, watching Mara's body language, how her eyes followed every footstep, how her muscles remained tight. She'd seen that posture before in grieving lions. But this was something deeper. Meanwhile, the dog, now locked in the concrete kennel, howled until his voice broke. He clawed at the door. Refused food. His paws bled. Eventually, he stopped making noise. Just lay against the corner, motionless. Dying from something no X-ray could diagnose. At 4:23 a.m., Evelyn unlocked his cage. The moment the gate swung open, he didn't hesitate. No bark. No confusion. Just a straight sprint down the gravel path, past 4 sleeping volunteers, through the staff corridor, into Pen 9. Mara was waiting at the gate. And when he slipped back inside, pressing his body to hers with a quiet, choked whimper, the leopard exhaled. Her eyes closed. And for the first time in days, they both slept. That morning, Evelyn finally gave the dog a name. Not out loud. Not to the staff. Just to herself. Cairo, from the old word kairos, meaning the right moment. The kind that doesn't come twice. No one else needed to know it yet. But she did. Because something was coming, she could feel it. And Cairo and Mara, whatever they were to each other, would not survive it unless someone stood between them and the system that wanted them apart. Someone who understood the most dangerous truth of all. That bonds like these don't happen twice. The sun hadn't risen yet when Evelyn found herself sitting outside Enclosure 9, coffee untouched in her thermos. The valley was still enough to hear the low rustling of feathers in the trees, the distant shuffle of boots in the staff corridor, and the faintest sound of breath from within the pen. 2 breaths, in fact. Perfectly synchronized. One from a predator. One from a stray. Evelyn had read about unlikely animal bonds before. A lioness in India that raised an antelope fawn. A dolphin that refused to leave a dog's side after a boat accident. But this was different. This wasn't a short-term, grief-induced attachment. It was something else, something unfolding moment by moment, deeper and more deliberate than anything she'd witnessed in her decades of fieldwork. Inside the pen, Mara's eyes opened the moment Cairo stirred. Not with panic or territorial tension, but with a softness, a kind of alertness only reserved for something cherished. Cairo padded across the dust, lapped at the metal water bowl, then looked back. Only after that did Mara rise. They moved in quiet rhythm, as if something invisible connected them. But outside the enclosure, the refuge was waking up in a very different way. In the main office, Martin was arguing with the district vet over the phone. His face was flushed, his voice strained. "I'm telling you, this isn't just some puppy that wandered in. The Leopard is stabilizing. We have biometric proof. Weight gain. Cortisol drop. She's eating regularly." A pause. "No, we didn't file a companion license, because we're not running a zoo act, Lisa. This isn't for show." Another pause. "She grieves when he's gone. You understand what that means?" He slammed the phone down gently, not from anger, but fatigue. This was the third such call in 48 hours. By noon, Evelyn knew the internal pressure would collapse into something worse, an intervention. The first attempt at separation came quietly. Two men in tan jackets, neutral expressions, carrying no gear but a leash and a tranquilizer kit they were told not to use unless it got unmanageable. They waited for feeding time, just like last time. But this time, Evelyn stood back and filmed. The handlers entered slowly. Cairo stiffened, ears drawn back. Mara rose immediately, not in aggression, but wariness. Her head lowered. Shoulders squared. Her tail moved side to side like a slow metronome. The moment one handler took a step toward the dog, Mara moved between them. She didn't growl. Didn't lunge. But her posture was clear. "Don't fall back," one muttered. They did. Outside, Evelyn looked at Martin. "Did you get that on tape?" He nodded silently. They tried again the next day. This time, they didn't enter the pen. They opened the outer gate and tried to lure Cairo out with roasted chicken, warm, fragrant, irresistible to most canines. To Cairo? Nothing. He stood at Mara's side, eyes darting from the gate to the volunteers and back to her. When she didn't move, he didn't either. The chicken was untouched. That evening, Evelyn sat with Mara during the health check. They couldn't get close, so she watched from the perimeter as Zola slid the meat into the feeding flap. The leopard took it gently, carried it to Cairo, and set it at his feet. Only when he began eating did she relax. Zola whispered beside Evelyn. "You think she sees him as a cub?" Evelyn shook her head. "No. She doesn't posture like a mother. She waits for him. Mirrors him. This isn't maternal. It's reciprocal. She's in love?" Evelyn didn't respond. Because whatever it was, she knew they didn't have language for it. The third attempt was the one that broke everything. It happened just after dusk. They had planned it with cold precision. Wait until Mara was in the sleeping den. Have two staff members distract her with visual stimulation, fabric strips and logs. Meanwhile, two others would sneak the dog out through the far gate. It worked, for exactly 30 seconds. Cairo was confused at first. Pulled halfway down the gravel path before realizing what was happening. His body twisted, eyes panicked. Behind him, the gate was already closing. And then, Mara's sound shattered the silence. A roar, not full-bellied, not violent, but strained. Like something being torn out from inside. The kind of sound Evelyn had only heard once before, when a lioness at a South African sanctuary lost her only cub to an infection. Mara clawed at the gate. Not wildly. Deliberately. She paced like a trapped storm cloud, brushing the perimeter with her shoulders, tracking the path Cairo had taken. In the holding kennel, Cairo slammed himself against the bars. Again. Again. His front paws bloodied, breath rapid. He cried, not with the yips of a frightened pup, but deep, guttural whimpers that sounded like something cracking inside him. That night, Evelyn sat between both enclosures for hours. Watching. Listening. Doing nothing. By morning, Mara had not moved from the gate. She refused food. Snarled when Zola approached. Her coat looked duller. Her movements slower. She didn't roar again. Just lay there. Waiting. By noon, Cairo had stopped barking. He huddled against the back corner of the concrete pen, head buried under his foreleg. At 4:23 a.m., Evelyn made her decision. She didn't call the board. Didn't write a report. She grabbed the master key, walked to the holding kennel, and opened the gate. Cairo didn't need to be called. The moment the latch clicked, he was gone. Through the narrow corridor. Across the gravel. Down the row of enclosures. He didn't slow down. He didn't look back. Mara was waiting. Not pacing. Not frantic. Just waiting. At the exact spot he had left. When he crossed the threshold, the world slowed. Cairo pressed his body against her ribs. Mara bent her head to his neck. Neither made a sound. And then, together, they sank into the earth as if gravity had been holding its breath. They slept for 11 hours. When they woke, they ate together. When they finished, they drank from the same bowl. And for the rest of the week, not once, not for a single second, were they more than a few feet apart. It wasn't just emotion. Evelyn had the data. Mara's cortisol levels dropped. Her temperature stabilized. Her weight began to rise. Cairo's wounds healed. He stopped pacing. He accepted food even when it came from unfamiliar hands, but only if she was watching. That week, Evelyn submitted a preliminary paper. It wasn't official, just a field report, passed quietly through behavioral science circles. She titled it, Cross-Species Emotional Bonding in a Non-Social Predator, a Case Study of Attachment Between Panthera pardus and Canis familiaris. Some responded with skepticism. Some called it anthropomorphism. But one reply came from a professor in Prague, an old colleague she hadn't heard from in years. It said, "You're not imagining this. You're witnessing it. Don't let them erase it." But Evelyn already felt the storm brewing. Martin had received a warning from the Wildlife Welfare Bureau. They were coming. Not to study. But to separate. And when they did, Evelyn knew they wouldn't care about trust, or data, or the way Cairo waited for Mara to finish her meal before taking his. They would see protocol. And nothing else. The envelope came on a Monday. Plain. Tan. No insignia on the front, just a waxy red stamp on the seal. It had been hand-delivered by a regional officer from the Wildlife Welfare Bureau, a man Evelyn had met once at a symposium in Pretoria and immediately forgotten. Now his words were printed in sterile font on a letterhead that bled bureaucracy. Given the ongoing interspecies cohabitation between a non-domesticated large carnivore, Panthera pardus, and an unregistered domestic canine, the Delmore Valley Wildlife Refuge is in violation of Articles 42b and 67f of the National Rehabilitation Mandate. Immediate rectification is required to maintain operational license. They didn't use names. Not Mara. Not Cairo. Just classifications. Objects in a legal system. Martin rubbed his forehead with both hands. They're giving us 48 hours. Evelyn didn't speak. She just stared at the page. Not at the words, but through them. Past the ink. Past the desk. Out toward the enclosure, where she knew Mara and Cairo were probably lying beneath the eucalyptus shade, side by side, the way they had every morning since the last failed removal. "I can delay them a day," Martin muttered. "File an appeal for a behavioral reassessment. But it won't hold. We don't have licensing for this. They'll cite us, shut us down." "Let them," Evelyn said quietly. "I'm not handing him over." Martin looked up, startled. "You'd let the entire refuge collapse for this?" She met his eyes. "What do you think they'll do with him once they take him? You think they'll rehome him? Study him? No, Martin. They'll put him down. A stray dog with aggressive behavioral flags and attachment to a predator? They'll euthanize him the moment we sign the papers." The air in the office shifted. The weight of truth landed like a falling beam. Martin looked down at the letter again, voice hoarse. Then we have less than 2 days. That night, Evelyn sat outside the enclosure under a floodlight, scribbling field notes on her clipboard. She wasn't just documenting anymore. She was building a case. Day 16. Mara positions herself in front of Cairo when approached by unfamiliar humans. When handler Zola enters, she remains relaxed. When visitor enters, Mara stands. This is not territory guarding, it is protective behavior. Day 17. Observed mutual grooming behavior. Cairo licked Mara's muzzle. No aggression noted. She returned the gesture by licking the side of his head. Leopards do not groom non-cubs unless deeply bonded. Day 18. Mara did not eat until Cairo approached the food tray first. Indicates either deference or a shared hierarchy structure. Remarkable. She attached thermal scans, sleep data, voice spectrums. Anything she could legally record, she logged. But even she knew, it wouldn't be enough. Not for the bureaucrats. Not for the ones who measured life in charts and safety codes. So she tried something else. At 2 a.m., Evelyn wrote a letter. Not to the Bureau, but to the world. She began posting clips, short, silent footage of Mara and Cairo walking together at dusk. Of Cairo bringing her a piece of blanket from the corner of the pen. Of Mara touching his flank gently with her paw when he startled at thunder. She didn't include narration. She didn't explain the science. She let the images speak. Within 36 hours, the videos had reached wildlife forums, then a South African rehabilitation network. By the third day, an Australian wildlife psychologist emailed her directly. I've studied 17 years of interspecies rehabilitation cases. I've never seen a bond like this. You need to keep them together. Then came the professor from Oregon State. This isn't anomaly. This is evolution in motion. If we don't study this ethically, we lose something important. But Evelyn knew none of it would matter without a paper trail. Bureaucracies didn't bend for emails or expert opinion. They moved on documents, precedent, and politics. So she escalated. She filed a formal request to the International Wildlife Ethics Board for emergency exemption under the Sentient Stability Clause, a rarely used provision that allowed bonded animals to remain together if separation risked psychological harm. She had no idea if it would go through. Most such requests were denied within hours. But this one didn't get denied. It went silent. Which meant they were watching. The next day, the Bureau officials arrived. 2 SUVs. Neutral uniforms. No expressions. They didn't ask for a tour. Didn't stop for coffee. Just walked directly to the pen with clipboards, cameras, and quiet voices. Mara rose when they approached. Not in aggression, just attention. Her body stiffened. Cairo pressed his nose to her leg, and she blinked once, slowly, like a signal. One of the men turned to Evelyn. We'll need to see them separated. Just temporarily. For evaluation. No, she said simply. He paused. That's not optional. Then you'll do it on camera, she said, lifting her phone. And explain to the world why you're forcibly removing a bonded pair that has caused no harm. There was silence. Cairo sat down beside Mara. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just looked at Evelyn. As if he knew. As if he'd known all along. The officer lowered his clipboard. You understand, if we don't proceed with the separation, you're officially out of compliance. Evelyn nodded. Then file your report. She didn't blink. Didn't flinch. She just waited. The man looked at Mara, then at Cairo. His mouth tightened. His voice dropped. We'll be back tomorrow. With authorization. That night, a storm rolled in, not in the sky, but in the valley. Every staff member felt it. Tension in the air. No one slept. Some silently packed personal items in case the facility was shut down. Others walked quietly to Enclosure 9, one by one, just to watch them, Mara and Cairo, curled in the dark, as if nothing was happening. At 3:17 a.m., Mara woke suddenly. Not to a sound. To a sense. Cairo stood, stiff-backed, ears forward. Someone was approaching. In the dark corridor of the staff building, Evelyn was sitting at her desk when her laptop pinged. One new message. No subject. She opened it. It was from the International Wildlife Ethics Board. Emergency exemption granted. Sentient stability clause approved. Effective immediately. The Delmore Valley Wildlife Refuge is permitted to maintain interspecies cohabitation between registered large predator, Mara, Panthera pardus, and certified companion, Cairo, Canis familiaris. Condition: document and share the case for future study. You have 90 days to prove this bond is more than an anomaly. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, hands trembling. Mara and Cairo had just been given time. Not forever. But time. The next morning, when the Bureau returned, Evelyn handed them the exemption with a single sentence. They stay. The men didn't argue. They simply nodded, turned, and left. No press. No debate. Just silence. But to Evelyn, that silence said everything. And as the sun crested the valley that day, Mara stood at the gate of her enclosure, not pacing, not anxious, but tall. Present. Cairo walked at her side. They didn't know what they'd been spared. But they knew something had shifted. Something that neither law nor instinct could explain. The sun rose gray and low behind the sanctuary gates that morning, an uncertain dawn, mirroring the mood across the compound. Neither Hannah nor Reed had slept. The decision had been made, not by them, but by the quiet machinery of policy and protocol. Within 48 hours, Naira, the young leopard, would be transferred to an isolated wildlife holding outside of Oregon. Her bond with the dog was considered a liability now, not a miracle. Marlowe didn't know what was coming. But Naira did. That morning, when Hannah entered the enclosure, Naira didn't rise. Her amber eyes tracked her trainer's movement, duller than ever before. Marlowe still lay curled at her side, his chin tucked between her paws. He hadn't left her in days. He only got up to eat, drink, and then returned to her silently, as if he knew something was unraveling. Hannah crouched beside them, brushing a hand along Marlowe's back. Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She wasn't just apologizing to Naira or Marlowe, she was apologizing to the universe, for trying to make sense of something no chart, no behaviorist manual, no species profile could explain. What they had, this bond, wasn't learned. It wasn't trained. It was chosen. Later that afternoon, the news broke. Not publicly, but through back channels in the wildlife community. Someone had leaked the footage. A short clip, no narration, no dramatic music, just raw security feed of a moment when Naira had refused food until Marlowe was brought to her. Another showed Marlowe dragging his water bowl closer to her when she couldn't rise. And the third, grainy, heartbreaking, was from the night she had been tranquilized. It showed Marlowe pacing, pawing at her motionless body, then lying beside her like a soldier guarding the fallen. Within hours, the compound's inbox was flooded. Scientists, wildlife experts, human psychologists, thousands of ordinary people from around the world. Let them stay together. Some bonds don't fit your categories. Is it really love? If it only makes sense to us? And yet, the board remained unmoved. Too dangerous, one of the directors had said. Too unpredictable. Their roles, their species, their futures, they didn't match the paperwork. That night, a storm of human emotions swept through the team. Reed stood at the center of the holding pen, watching the two souls they'd fought so hard for. "I'd rather lose my license," he muttered, "than be the one to separate them." Hannah stepped forward, her voice low. "Then we fight it. Not with protests. Not with headlines. But with truth." And that's what they did. They invited behavioral scientists from 3 universities. They brought in journalists, not tabloids, but real field reporters who understood animal cognition and emotional intelligence. And most of all, they brought in the law, not to twist it, but to challenge it. Hannah compiled every moment of documented behavior, shared grooming, synchronized sleeping patterns, mirrored distress responses. Reed found old footage from his years in the field, showing elephants mourning, wolves adopting orphan pups, not just instincts, but something deeper. Something deliberate. Then, just as momentum built, Marlowe collapsed. It happened during an early morning vet check. He'd been listless for days, but this was different. His breathing was shallow, gums pale. The vet suspected he had been refusing to eat while Naira grieved. Not out of sadness, but solidarity. They rushed him to the sanctuary's clinic. Naira was locked in her enclosure, pacing, snarling at anyone who came near. She knew he was gone. Hannah sat beside his stretcher, her heart cracking in places she didn't know existed. "Come on," she whispered. "If she's your reason, don't leave her now." For 6 hours, they fought to stabilize him. Outside, Naira's cries grew so piercing, so guttural, they shook the fence posts. But then it stopped. Silence. Moments later, Naira lay down. Not in defeat, but still, calm, as if a wire of connection had twitched through the air, and she knew. In the clinic, Marlowe's eyes opened. It was a whisper of life, but enough. He lifted his head just an inch, and then collapsed again. The vet smiled. "He's choosing to fight." In the days that followed, the media storm reached Washington. A senator known for her work in wildlife policy called the sanctuary personally. "We're watching closely," she said. "You may have just changed the conversation around animal cognition forever." And then, the impossible happened. The board reversed their decision. Not permanently, but they granted what they called an emotional bond clause, a temporary reprieve. Naira would not be transferred. Marlowe would remain by her side under monitored conditions. It wasn't everything, but it was hope. Reed, hardened and skeptical all his life, choked back emotion. "They didn't just rewrite protocol," he said. "They rewrote the line between instinct and love." On the day Marlowe returned to Naira's enclosure, a hush fell over the compound. Staff lined the fence quietly, no cameras, no commentary. Marlowe walked slowly, still weak. And Naira, her body visibly trembling, didn't leap or run. She simply approached, leaned her head against his, and closed her eyes. There was no sound. No wild celebration. Just breath. And stillness. And a bond no one could name. It was Hannah who finally whispered what none of them had dared to say before. "This isn't science," she said. "It's something older." And in that quiet, in the shadow of decisions almost made and almost lost, something became clear. We don't always get to define connection. Sometimes it defines us. And so, against every expectation, the world didn't pull them apart. It leaned in, watched, and listened. The leopard and the puppy, bound not by blood or species but by something ancient and unspoken, remained together. In their quiet companionship, they didn't just survive, they changed minds, rewrote rules, and reminded everyone watching that real love doesn't always follow logic, it follows the heart.